Hi, this is Bob Weiss. I'm the host of Shaking Your World. Cheers. Folks, hello, and welcome to another edition of Shaking Your World. Today at the Marvelous Shakers in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, we are talking with Romke, who is a bit of a, well, he's more than a bit. He is certainly a very accomplished IT, creative tech guy that is changing the world in some ways. It's really predicated upon delving into our modern society and extracting as much as you can as a futurist would do.
Yeah.
Romke, welcome to the program, and cheers to you.
Salud.
Thanks for taking the time to be here.
Oh, thank you for letting me be here. I'm excited.
So you've got a rather storied career for a young man.
Yeah,
Want to talk about what you've been doing?
Well, I started in my career when I was 17 years old.
Okay.
Actually, not too far from here on 11th and Mineral, through a program called Homeboys.
Okay.
And so they took kids that were in the inner city and basically gave them an education to start a career in technology. And so 24 years later, I am still working in technology, and I've gotten to work all over the world, and it's been great.
That's magnificent. So Homeboys really worked on the entire STEM program, right?
Yeah, I mean, they covered, I guess it was a STEM program before STEM was STEM.
Okay.
But yeah, they covered the holistic person, you know, so not only are they going to give you a career, but they're going to give you kind of a holistic view on life and how to improve your overall living. We had like an investment club, and you know, they did things like help me learn. I was a high school dropout, so learning how to just write and read well was also a big part of it.
So the entire gestalt, really getting all the parts together.
Yeah.
That's nice. So who funded that?
It was funded by a bunch of nonprofits, but it was started by the Jesuit community. So they actually have a Homeboy in LA,
Okay.
Which is one of the largest nonprofits in the world, focused on gang prevention. And they decided a couple of the Jesuits decided to start a chapter here.
Is that tied in with like Marquette University at all, Jesuit program? Or?
You know, they're all tied together. Yeah,
Those wacky Jesuits. Good.
Yeah, they're an interesting bunch. Yeah, for sure.
Well, we have, I personally, and certainly this program has long maintained that education is the most crucial element in our society, that we have to have people better prepared for their own future and for the future of the society. And that really begins with an educational process, and that's as young as you can get people started or hooked on something, the better, because then it's second nature, right?
Right.
And without the intervention, and fortunately there are programs that have the intervention like the one you went through, and hopefully that continues on, and there's a way to find an avenue to get even more support taking place for things like that.
Yeah, I mean, we were one of the first organizations to do it, and 20-some years later, there's hundreds of organizations all over the world that are focusing on you know, bridging that gap, trying to essentially get anyone that's been in underserved or
At risk
okay. Community and deliver opportunity. You know, there's always these big opportunity gaps that people kind of face when they're come from a certain community and trying to make themselves into something.
So your last name is rather interesting. So I'm gathering it's going to be Dutch or
it is Dutch.
Indonesian.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm actually a mix. So
okay.
I'm my mother's Mexican.
Okay.
And so we're pretty Mexican on that side. We actually just found out that our ancestors come from Texas, and then that's when Mexico was owned by Texas.
Sure.
And then they sold it to the United States, and so my ancestors went to Mexico City. So I didn't realize how much indigenous I had until like recently. And then my father is from Indonesia, but he's Dutch Indonesian, and so a lot of things happened in Indonesia.
Is that like war. Jakarta or?
Yeah, he was born in Bandung, which is a little east of there.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's an interesting mix. But my dad is actually he's like Dutch, German, Chinese, and Indonesian. So it's pretty cool.
All worldly.
Yeah. I literally have family all over the world. It's awesome.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
So here you are in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm sure you could be almost anywhere at this point.
Right.
Because you really are on the cutting edge of IT in so many ways. And not just IT as people think about software or perhaps even hardware,
right.
but really...
I'm not going to fix your computer. I'm sorry. Can't do it.
Go ahead. good. Apple, not a concern. But you are really the guy that's able to bridge a gap in many ways and to get, well, why don't you tell exactly what you do?
Yeah, no, so a lot of what I do is, as you mentioned, bridging the gap. So a lot of organizations will have problems of just not keeping up with technology or having too much technology in place and not necessarily having a plan.
Sure.
You know, it's like trying to save a sinking ship with 100 holes in it. And so I'll go into an organization and help them kind of think of their overall strategy.
Okay.
And how do you kind of think about modernization? How do you think about organizations? And really, how do you think about human happiness inside of your organization as you deliver and serve, whichever people.
So you're really more of a futurist then, aren't you? Because you're not working on really what the technology is today. You're looking about how to make it work for them in the future, right?
Yeah, you definitely are. A lot of the work that I've done. So I owned a company here that we did a lot of innovation work, and so a lot of it was helping. Like we helped Kohl's, which is an organization here, think about, what does retail mean in 20, 10 years from now? How are people's shopping habits going to change? What are some of the cultural nuances and what are some of the technical advances that we could do to be able to kind of just experiment? So we helped build their innovation lab in Santa Clara, California, where they did things like hack a Tesla to see, how does retail kind of fit in your digital world while you're driving, or how does it fit at home? And so all these different ways to think about the future. There was a lot about smaller footprints in more populous places, 20, 30 years from now. You're going to have a smaller footprint. So how do you think about that in your home, and how does that fit in retail?
What about relationships and interrelationships? Because the world is changing in so many ways, and I have ad nauseum talked about the roles between men and women and how things have shifted so dramatically, and the traditional concepts really are, sloughed to the side.
Yeah. Relationships are really interesting, and we're kind of living in a very complicated time, because we have this data overload, right? And so we're in a space now where before, data and knowledge was at a value, right? So if I was in the 70s or even in the early 1900s. The information I got was all kind of given to me in a physical sense, right? And so I would most likely have to pay a significant amount of money for each of these types of information that I would get, or pay someone to physically kind of teach me like an apprentice model.
Right.
And essentially that is getting completely disrupted. Universities are starting to be challenged by what it means to have learning, because so many people like myself, I went to college for a semester, but I've learned everything I've learned on my own, and that cost me really nothing, more than time.
Right.
And so we're living in a day and age where we're getting so much information, it's almost out of debt. We have too much information, and so how we sift through it, how we understand it, is really important, and that impedes relationships, right? Right now, as we're living in an election time, there's a lot of being kind of a person who plays in security. There's a lot of external and internal information that is that you really have to spend time to kind of figure out, is this real? Who should I believe? Who's telling the truth? And that creates a lot of conflict between families and interpersonal relationships. And since you're kind of getting bombarded with the externals, your interpersonal relationships also kind of get into question, is the person that I'm personally interacting with, are they telling me everything? And do I have the collection of data that they're doing in social media, in responding to text messages, FaceTime, all the different digital interactions that they have? So there's more information that you're receiving from one individual. It makes that relationship even more complicated.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, every industry is going to be impacted tremendously in the next 5 to 10 years. And whether it's autonomous cars, whether it's AI, whether it's robotics, the world is changing. It's not going to stand still.
Right.
And I expect, particularly in our society, we are just not prepared for that. So these major companies that you're working with, how do you begin the process to kind of direct them to say, this is all fine and dandy. We appreciate what you've done the last 30 or 40 years, but this will be much different in 2 years, let alone in 10 years. So how do you structure that and get them to look at the big picture?
Yeah, it's really interesting. You kind of have to have the muscle memory for change, right?
Okay.
And like, it's just like when you train a professional athlete to like adopt a new routine. There's a lot of like physical things that they have to kind of learn and build that necessarily isn't that they kind of have to do instinctively. And so organizations also have that kind of muscle memory and instinctive reactions. I call it organizational debt.
Okay.
Organizational debt is like, there was one company that they use it as an example, like kind of in the industry, that every Tuesday they did accounting. And they got so big that every Tuesday when they did accounting, it just got more and more complicated because there was more things that needed to be processed and it wasn't enough time to do that. And a consultant came in and was, well, why are you doing this? And they said, well, we don't know.
We've always done this.
Accounting. Yeah. And so he did a little bit of research and found that the only reason they did accounting every Tuesday was because the accountant who used to be there would come in every Tuesday. And so they basically had this process and procedure that was outlined in their operating procedures, and it made no sense to have it anymore. So once they removed it, it kind of released them to think about it differently. Sure. And so what I try to do is get organizations to constantly kind of evolve and think as their business is not like a house. I build a house and now it's done. It's more like a garden, And so the garden is I grow my plants. Some plants are seasonal. Some things I have to kind of tend to. Sure. But it's not the same garden every single time, right? And there's all these different factors that kind of impact how you do it that are all situational to that to that garden. And so organizations are like that too. You have to adjust to new business, and you have to think about, well, how does that new business or that new technology impact the overall structure of how we make money?
Right.
And it comes down to even like a lot of older companies have certain ways how they kind of organize profit. And sometimes when you have a new market, you can't think in that way, and so you have to think even differently to like, oh, well, if right now this is a $10,000 idea, it might turn into a $10 million idea.
Sure.
If you kind of play around with the market and understand it a little bit more.
So do you find that the companies that you, obviously they're intentionally bringing you in and they've got a purpose in mind because they need help, right?
Right.
So, but do you find there's some reluctance, after you get past the initial point to say, again, this is how we've done things, but we're going to change this for you?
Yeah. I mean, imagine coming in here and being like, hey, your job is no longer important, because we're introducing this new process, or it's no longer your responsibility, it's everybody's responsibility. Or to say like, you've had the same job for 15 years and you have to think about something differently, if not, you're going to be completely irrelevant. And so that from the human side sucks,
Well, yeah, obviously, that job driving that semi is going to be gone because you got autonomous semis that are coming online, right? So what do you do with those people, right? And again, you can't retrain them to do computer coding.
Well, I mean, so luckily things like that, like autonomous vehicles, probably 20, 30 years out, right? Okay. But the industry needs to have a plan to be like, if this is something that they want to get into, how are they going to kind of adjust and change regulations and essentially, move around personnel and people to be able to create new ways of thinking, right? They may not, like, for example, let's say a truck driver who's done the same route for 10 years may know the best route to get there. So they can educate and train the system to be able to do that, and they can become experts in that because they know the path, right? So that would be probably a cool transition for somebody that would have that job to do something else.
Oh yeah.
And so, but it happens all over, and that's why Congress and all and the government kind of are doing like taxation for new. If you create a new technology that essentially takes away jobs, we're going to tax it so that essentially replaces the economies that were previously there.
In kind of a way, it's almost like the defund the police movement, because the core of that really makes a lot of sense, that you take the onus off of law enforcement for doing many of the myriad social tasks
Right.
that they're really not equipped to do,
Exactly.
right? And have greater funding for those agencies that could then be going and doing something. Unfortunately, the way that this is brought forward and has been bandied about and really changed so much into something different, it's going to obscure the good intent of really what the program could be, right? So I'm sure you've got the same thing every day with everything you encounter, because now you're taking that assembly line and we're going to outsource that or do something else with that to make it more efficient for everybody. And you're going to then unfortunately be debasing those people that are working on that line doing that. Doesn't mean you can't find something else for them to do, but it means that that particular segment is no longer viable.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's even happened in my own personal career.
Okay.
I used to work on a particular technology.
Okay.
And that technology got what's called end of life, meaning
Sure.
it was no longer going to be
Right.
utilized. And so, I'd spent 10 years working on this technology, was considered one of the top, 50 in the world for what I did, but it ended.
Right.
And a lot of people that were in the same boat that I were completely lost.
Yeah.
I luckily had a transition to owning my own business and could shift the team into doing different things. But
Sure.
it happens in the tech space faster than in any other space, just because technology changes so often.
Right. Huh. Okay. And obviously, the demand for your particular type of service is not just in the U.S. Right.
Right.
So it's I don't want to say a global economy, because that really gets people kind of wired in a different way as well. But we clearly have, and for many years, we have had connections with scientific community and the technological community throughout the world, right? And yet we still have this nationalism that goes on amongst really everybody. And to get that commonality to move something forward has got to be a challenge by itself. And maybe it's something as simple as finding the right language to work with has to be a challenge sometimes, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. I'm working with a company in Sweden right now, and they're all about robotics automation.
Okay.
And they are trying to get into the U.S. market, but they're having a hard time because the U.S. market isn't there yet.
Okay.
So, working across the globe, you can kind of see the different nuances. I was supposed to spend 2 months in Peru,
Okay.
working with their government and their tech seed incubation groups, and it's interesting to see countries that maybe haven't had the same tempo, but don't have the technical debt or organizational debt.
Right.
So they can kind of leapfrog to different technologies, or leapfrog to different initiatives, or create new markets in ways that countries like us haven't been able to do.
Well, we certainly have the technological capacity, ability, and intellect for things, but we're mired down, I'm going to guess, by just our social constructs and how we have this workforce in place that we don't want to move out of the way, right? We don't. I mean, obviously nobody wants to put somebody at work, but that has to be an impediment to getting things to move forward faster in the U.S., or is it because our political nature isn't geared up?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little mix of everything.
Okay.
Like, we have a very old network. Our infrastructure
Okay.
is really slow.
Okay.
We're usually, I think, 5 to 10 years behind countries like Japan. They're a lot smaller. They can adjust. They were doing FaceTime-like things, in the early 2000s, where we didn't get that till the mid 2000s.
Sure. Well, why is that?
It's just infrastructure. The ability to kind of move infrastructure at a faster pace because you're in a smaller footprint is a lot to different.
So we're talking like fiber optics. We're talking about that's got to be part of the scene
Yeah,
as well,
I mean,
right?
it's fiber. It's you got to think about 5G and how that's kind of expanding in different areas. We
Kills
really
birds, doesn't it? 5G and brain tumors and
Right. As aliens, but all that stuff, including what happens in our own government, all those things add a little bit of complexity.
Okay.
If I already purchased, $1 billion worth of infrastructure,
Sure.
to add new technology is going to be a lot more expensive if I don't have that the ability to be flexible on the dime.
So is that on the local level, or is that state level, or is that national level, or a combination? Obviously,
It's a combination.
Okay.
It's really everywhere.
Because I can recall that maybe 15 or 18 years ago, Milwaukee was all about becoming an electric city. Like, we're going to be an electric city. So,
So they have the little power neons.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. So I've got a Tesla, and I had to put my own supercharger on my own building here because I couldn't find one in Milwaukee proper.
Right.
So there's Oak Creek, and there's a few things west of here now, but for a year there's been no charging stations in the city of Milwaukee. It's absurd for an electric city.
So that's a perfect example of Tesla, right?
Right.
Tesla doesn't have a dealership here in Wisconsin, and the reason why it didn't was political. And so
Tony Evers yet again.
Yeah. Like electric cars here in the state has not progressed. But there's so there's an impediment. It's like if I bought a Tesla and I need to get it fixed, where do you have to go? You have to go to Illinois to get it fixed, right?
Well, they just opened one in Wauwatosa.
Oh, okay.
So that just came online. But yeah.
But so before that though, you have to go to Illinois.
Yep.
So that in itself is a prohibitor of innovation, right?
Huge.
So
Right.
now that hopefully we have more people buying Teslas, we're putting pressure on the government to be able to offer incentives and all the different types of things.
Well, I recently, re-upped my registration, my annual registration.
You get taxed?
And I get taxed.
the
An extra
gas
$100. I'm thinking how
Yeah.
bizarre this is because, again, this is this electric city. We're making the strides forward, technology forward, Wisconsin, right? And yet,
Right. No.
how
not
draconian?
happening.
How draconian?
Right. Yeah. It's frustrating because you want to be innovative. You want to offer, the best for the consumer.
Right.
But there's politics that get in the way of making that happen.
Yep. Okay. So the security aspect that you're working at, is this like the root servers? Are you interacting with those? Because I know they're always under attack.
Well, so I work in cloud security. So
Okay.
are you familiar with cloud?
Well, I think I
So-
am, but
So for the cloud, right?
it's under the sea, right? But okay.
It's so not to get like too nerdy, but before like a server was like if you went to a website, it was on a physical machine, right?
Right.
And now everything's in virtual machines.
Right.
And you don't actually interact with machines, you interact with software
Right.
to host sites and do all these different things. And
It's magic, right?
yeah, magic. And so I work with my organization to do cloud security.
Okay.
And so it's a new technology. It's only been around for I think like a little less than a decade. And so anytime there's new technology, there's net new risk, right? So people are just starting to understand what security means in the cloud,
Right.
And the different types of cloud that are out there. Each one introduces a new type of risk.
Okay.
Because if I don't own the security, if I don't have to worry about the computer, what do I have to worry about? And so it's complicated. There's so many companies that are that have like pretty well-known breaches. Like Tesla was an interesting one. They got breached in the cloud, and people were doing what's bit mining for Bitcoin. They were essentially just using their servers to mine Bitcoin. So who would have thought that would be a use case for that type of breach before?
Right.
Bitcoin cloud, that wasn't around 2000. You know what I'm saying? So this is all new technologies that people are constantly trying to innovate on and figure out where are the vulnerabilities and how can we kind of protect our corporations and our data to against threat. So it's pretty cool.
So getting back to a moment for those root servers, and I know that this is a huge thing with NSA and DoD at one point because I believe there are 7 primary root servers in the country, and any given day there were 2 of them that were under attack, enough so that they were non-functional. So they had to then use whatever redundant programs that they've got to compensate for that. How do we get past that with the clouds? Is that the same kind of concern with the cloud that they too are under attack, or?
Yeah, so cloud is trying to disperse, right?
Okay.
And there's something called resilient architecture, which is pretty much just, how do you kind of distribute amongst a network of networks your information so that you can reduce the amount of risk and increase the amount of uptime, meaning that your website's up, 365 days, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
So when you breach a cloud, is that called raining, by the way?
I think you just coined a new term.
Oh, okay.
I think we're gonna have to use that.
Yeah,
one.
why not?
Yeah.
But are the risks as big today as they were 3 years ago or 5 years ago, or bigger perhaps?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I guess to answer that is that they're probably bigger.
Because we have more people that are more adept, or?
Yeah, it's just more people are adopting it.
Okay.
It's a new technology, right?
Okay.
And so before, when there's a smaller footprint of people using the technology,
Right, you could control
it's
it.
not as important
Right.
to threat actors that are going to try to compromise the system.
Okay.
But the more use that people get out of it, the more interesting it becomes as a target. And
Okay.
so I think you're going to see that more and more of just like more significant amount of breaches that are out there and people reacting to it in a different way.
Well, there's a huge problem with that 14-year-old kid sitting in their mom's basement somewhere that was able to breach
Yeah,
all
yeah,
sorts
I
of stuff.
saw that.
Is that still?
Was that the school? He's like hacked the school or
I
changed his grade
I
or
don't
something?
know how it happened, but
I'm sure he's going to get a good job after
I'm
that.
sure he will actually.
That's usually what happens.
But at some point, is it still going to be that 14-year-old kid in mom's basement, or is it the covey of Russians that are sitting there, that are tooling the stuff up?
I mean, it's both really.
Okay.
It's real interesting. You have like people that are you have obviously nation state actors that are. They have like legions, just like military based.
And I'll guess that's Russia, Ukraine, and China. They're probably the biggest three offenders.
Well, the U.S. has like a list.
Okay.
It's public. You can check it out.
Okay.
They tell you like,
Sure.
here are all the biggest actors, and obviously the ones that are public are the ones that you know. But there's a lot of nation states have their own kind of team. Like the Israeli, I forget the name of the group, but they're considered some of the best in the industry, and they've made a lot of platforms now that are like from this group,
Sure.
that are selling some of the best and like hottest like cybersecurity tools that are out there.
Sure.
So I don't know. It's fascinating. It's super complicated, because you also have people that are just basically they're like the gatekeepers. Like they'll break into a system and be like, "Hey, I got into so and so. I'll sell this for $1 million. I'll sell the access. I've been sitting here for 6 months, and then somebody will buy it." Put in ransomware. You're familiar with the term ransomware, and they'll lock all the data up and say, hey, for $20 million, you'll get your data back. And a lot of companies have the cybersecurity risk insurance and will pay that money to get access to data because some of it. If I'm a hospital, if I'm a financial institution, and I have customers that depend on that data every single day to live their lives or to stay alive. You're going to have to pay. It's probably cheaper to pay it than cheaper to fix it.
So I kind of look at this like America for the longest time has had, we will not be blackmailed kind of a thing. We can't be extorted on something. But I'd have to imagine that there's all sorts of payouts that take place on a regular basis that are not sanctioned or we just don't know about.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Most of the corporate ones have to be identified.
Okay.
They have to be recorded and reported to the FBI.
Okay.
A lot of times the FBI will call you up and say, you've been compromised.
Okay.
And then it becomes a very public,
Yeah.
because all the information gets put into a DOJ report.
Sure.
That report gets published, and so a lot of people can kind of read that information and see exactly what happened.
I would imagine that really only pertains to public companies though, right?
No, anyone that's been compromised, significant amount, public or private.
What determines the threshold for a significant amount?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I know for organizations that are in the tens of millions, or even if I was a company, let's say a small company that had a lot of information on people, that would have to be reported. Not all of them are, right? Of course,
Sure.
but if any of the agencies catch it, they'll report it, or if you report it to your cybersecurity insurer, because you need to
make a file claim.
File a claim.
That sounds
All
so
has to be
esoteric. So is that an expensive policy to have?
Yeah, it's very expensive.
Okay.
Yeah, depending on the size of your organization.
So by the nature of the beast, it precludes many businesses.
Well, I mean, if you're doing a significant amount of business,
Okay.
it scales. It scales with the
Sure.
amount of money and impact that you have.
Okay.
If I'm a $1 million online retailer, I probably should have it.
Okay.
If I'm selling like tens of thousands of dollars, I probably will have a few thousand people,
Sure.
and I probably don't even have a security program, so
Right.
I'm not unaware of it.
Right. So are you also writing security protocols for people, or you're beyond that point?
Oh yeah, so I actually just created a security framework
Okay.
for what's called SaaS. SaaS is called is software as a service.
Okay.
So things like Facebook that you probably have used, or Trello, like any software that you would use online
Okay.
to deliver something is called software as a service.
Okay.
And so remember I was talking about like the complexities of having somebody else own the infrastructure.
Right.
Like, what is your responsibility?
Right.
That's called the shared responsibility model. And so with
Okay.
the SaaS solution, all you have to really worry about is your data and your user management.
Okay.
And so I helped create a framework that essentially looks at every single SaaS tool and puts down specific controls, and we'll go against the company and say, okay, are you following these specific things to make
Sure.
sure that your program is safe?
So let's say, for example, we have any number of the Fortune 500 companies that's based in Milwaukee metropolitan area. There are a couple, right? So what do they, or what should they be looking at as a background check or something on their people? I mean, the psychology of identifying as someone who is prone to be soliciting that information for untoward uses has to be significant, right? So
Yeah, so there's a whole, I'm not a part of this one, but there's
Sure.
a whole insider threat, it's
Okay.
called. And so a lot of organizations have, especially if you're in the financial sector, you have to follow the regulations of government, and there's
Okay.
certain regulations that you need to look at to be able to, handle money at a
Sure.
certain thing. And so a lot of people will follow those protocols to look at insider threat. But if you're in a significant area, a lot of people will have kind of certain standards that are out there that they'll just follow. And so being able to do psychological evaluations, or if you're in government and you have secret or top secret clearance, like
Right.
every once in a while you have to get checked
Right.
to make sure that you adhere to the standards of that type of delivery, because you don't want somebody to compromise the security of something.
Right.
Which has happened. Capital One, everyone who's used that, there was a huge breach, and it was an insider threat. It was somebody that worked there.
Even occasionally, federal agents are nicked. Yes.
Yeah.
And they've gone through extensive background checks.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to do, right?
Right.
The security is not 100%.
Right.
You would only be a fool to think about that as a completely secure.
Sure.
There's no walls, ain't no mountain high enough.
There you go. Well, and everybody has, obviously we're human, we all have our own foibles and our own dark side, and there's something that is just going to be a little mechanism for someone at some point that
Right.
is going
right.
to supersede their loyalty to something else.
I had a friend of mine go through security clearance, and one of the points that actually hurt their clearance was that they had too much debt, and that could be used as leverage
Sure.
against them from,
Right.
somebody offered you to pay off all your debt to do something.
Right.
You may consider it.
Yep.
So it's an interesting problem.
Sure. So where do you see the industry, your industry? I mean, there's so many different, it's like a hydra, there's so many different parts of the cool stuff that you're doing. How do you see that evolving in the next 5 or 10 years? I mean, obviously it's going to continue forward, but
Yeah, I mean, it's going so fast now.
is any one thing going to look like it's going to be predominant?
I mean, cloud computing is still going to be a thing. That's still going to grow. Automation, like I said, automation hasn't really kind of institutionalized itself as
Okay.
much as it has in other countries in the U.S.
Sure.
So we'll be catching up to that in the 5 to 10 years. So you're
Okay.
going to see a lot more automation going on.
Sure.
IoT, Internet of Things, and not just IoT. Like I have a cool watch and I can do that, but
Okay.
I have all my different pieces of my lights, my manufacturing.
Sure.
even down to like how many people are sitting in this
Right.
in this place.
Sure.
You know, you'll see more of that as time goes on.
3 years, 5 years, 10 years?
I would say that's probably more of a 10-year thing.
Okay.
You got to think the mouse took 20 years to reach a billion,
Okay.
and so you probably won't see. You know, you're starting to see different things that are happening in technology with automation.
Yep.
That's working really well, and you have leaders in the space like Amazon. You know, they have all these automated things to deliver and move things around, and they're switching some things from robotics to people. And so that's having a huge impact, and different manufacturing companies that have already reduced their amount of like human resources to automated resources.
What about things like Apple was making a huge shift right now, getting away from Intel, they're going through their own processors, and obviously there's going to be a ramp up that goes along with that, and all of the people that have been working on code projects and designing apps or anything else, now it's going to be a whole different methodology. So when you're making a transition like that, and this might be outside your realm, but you're making a transition from one standard to another standard on a massive level, that's got to have all sorts of opportunities for things to go awry as well.
Oh, for sure. But you got to think Apple's been working on this for 20 plus years, right? And they introduced it into their phone chipset,
Right.
and then they're now transitioning to their hardware.
Right.
I think just yesterday they released a new hardware-enabled
For their
chip
tablets
that didn't
yeah.
have that chip before, right?
Right.
And so, it's going to create a shift. But I think a lot of Apple engineers are used to Apple kind of always innovating and pushing the envelope and depreciating technologies, and so that industry is pretty used to it. I think when you're introducing new things like machine learning or artificial intelligence, becoming a more accessible technology, meaning that you know, the engineers that couldn't have access to it, the common engineer, well now has more access to it, right? And so that means that just more machine learning is going to get introduced into the industry, more automation, more predictive models is what's a big part of machine learning, being able to predict things, you know, being able to predict like is someone's loan gonna default,
Right.
or you know, when the weather's about to
Arbitrage
happen,
or something, sure.
markets, so and all that stuff.
So does that also does that mean that supercomputers can effectively breach current security?
Well, it's interesting because now we're getting into machine learning,
Right. So they can teach themselves as
and,
well.
and machine learning is starting to make its way into the cybersecurity space, right?
Okay.
Where I can learn what the potential breaches will be. Right?
Sure. Well, I mean, like if there's Seymour Cray is obviously dead, but you know, if he had set his mind to the evil side of this, the evil scientist, could he have developed his supercomputers that they would have then broken into other systems? I'd imagine the answer is yes.
Yeah. I mean, there's tons of machines that.
Okay.
I mean, there's so many different stories of people that have written, you know, software that have crippled entire networks because, you know, it grew into what it was intended to do, right? Create destruction and
Right.
And so the more and more technologies out there, the more and more risk people are.
Sure.
Not to freak everyone out, but it's just risk, right? Like if you add another door into your house, that's another door you have to secure and make sure that it's there.
Yep.
So you're introducing all these different things, and so security is going to look different in business, but also in the home.
Right. What should the average person be concerned about?
Their data, like where they say it, what they say it, how they say it. I check my data every morning. Like I check my credit score, my credit reports. I check there's a service that I use that can tell if there was like an identity breach or anything. I get a report if they do, but I always check it every morning. I just always made it get a habit.
How do you have time?
It's just when I wake up, like first thing I do. Literally,
Man,
first thing I do
have so
every
many
morning.
sites and so many different passwords with so many things. It's a challenge sometimes
Yeah.
to keep up to date with everything.
It is. But you know, as a person who does this for a living, it's what I am like super paranoid about, right?
Okay.
And so just making sure that, you know, what were today's breaches, you know, and do I have something in there?
Sure.
I have a service that will tell me if one of my logins was breached, and every site that I have has a unique password, so
Okay.
I can disable that account or reset the login.
Sure.
Something simple as that, or notify creditors or freeze my accounts if I need to. So
Okay.
it's really important to have.
So why Milwaukee?
This is where I'm from.
Yep.
My grandfathers both immigrated here. One of my grandfather from Holland and my other grandfather from Mexico, following his brother, who got invited to be a welder at Excalibur. I lived all over. I lived in New York. I lived in DC. I lived in Chicago, Columbus, just after working in government for a few years. Had a job offer in Dallas, Texas, but decided to be here just because I have kids, and so I just wanted to be home.
This is a much better environment for kids than Dallas is, so yeah. Say the least in lots of places. Well, good for you. Do you ever get asked to talk to youth at schools or universities or something like that?
Yeah, all the time.
Okay.
I think, somebody gave me an opportunity to change my life, and so I pay that 10 times over every year. I'm either on a board of a bunch of nonprofits that do youth work, or I directly work. Like every Tuesday and Thursday, I teach computer programming to a bunch of kids in the Bronx.
Nice.
And then I helped set up a nonprofit in LA.
We're clearly not flying back and forth these joints.
No, right now it's all virtual.
Right.
But if I had the ability to fly back, if I felt comfortable, I would do it.
Sure.
But I think once everything calms down, I'll be back.
November 4th, or what do you think that's going to be?
Probably mid 2021.
Yeah. Okay. Your favorite food?
Favorite food? Nasi goreng. It's Indonesian fried rice.
Okay.
Yeah.
What makes that unique?
I don't know. It's sweet and savory.
Okay.
Feels like home.
Okay.
I went to Bali last year and took a cooking class and tried to master how to cook it. And I feel like I got it down pretty good.
So primary protein in that is?
You can actually switch it out. So you can chicken, rice, chicken, pork, tofu, whatever you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bali, I'd imagine shrimp or things like that as well.
Yeah.
A lot of seafood there. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. How'd you like Bali?
Oh, I loved it. Bali is it's such a beautiful place.
But not a place to raise kids?
I mean, if my ex-wife wouldn't mind me moving there, I don't think all my kids like it because it's really hot. But I got to go visit my great grandfather's grave.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of family history.
Yeah.
So to be able to touch something that my ancestors lived in or experienced is
cool.
Is really cool.
Very nice.
And just the vibe, everyone there is so happy.
Yeah. And
they live a completely different lifestyle than we do here. That's what he's talking
Well, that's
about.
cool. What makes Indonesian fried chicken different than, let's say, Memphis fried chicken?
I don't know, man. Asians cultures, for at least the Asian countries that I've been to, they love fried chicken. You go to KFC in Japan, it's fancy. It's not like a regular restaurant. It's really nicely decked out. And so that's kind of cool. But yeah, fried chicken is a thing that I've learned to appreciate more than I did here.
Okay.
What about South America travels?
Yeah.
So where have you been in South America?
So I go to Honduras, which is Central America, but I was supposed to go to Peru this past couple months, but COVID didn't let me. But I work with an orphanage called Macias.
Okay.
And so I try to go there often, but essentially it's an orphanage in Honduras. In Honduras, they do what's called social killings.
Okay.
Where they gather up the kids that don't have a home, and they will murder them on the streets. And so I don't know how much it happens now, but so this nonprofit essentially goes and takes these kids and houses them, and they don't give them up for adoption. They actually try to raise them to be essentially leaders in Honduras, to be active members of their community.
Is that a Jesuit program as well?
No, it's actually a friend of mine in Atlanta.
Okay.
He's a pastor.
Okay.
And he and his family saw the atrocities that were happening and decided to do something.
I've never heard of this. I've been around quite a bit. I have never heard of that.
Yeah, it's really sad. Honduras, San Pedro Sula specifically, is one of the most dangerous places in the world.
Okay.
And so I spent some time there with these kids, and it's crazy to see. There's one kid, Anderson, who I really connected with, and he was tortured on the streets by the gangs, and all the work that we were doing with him, he ended up getting killed because of all the situations that happened there. And so it's a hard experience and a hard life, but like seeing a lot of these kids when I first started going there were real little, and now they're becoming teens and adults, and they're starting to have college, and they're starting to
Thinking about their future.
think about their future, and it's something it's an opportunity they've never had before.
Yeah.
So it's a great organization.
Kudos for that. Please, of course, I'm sure you'll furnish all of your links to everything so we can get everything tied into this. So when you're in these other countries and you're doing the work that you're doing, how do you pass as an American? How do you work through the system? Because I've been in some countries where, man, you're an American, you are just not remotely welcome or wanted. Like Guatemala is one of those that it's we can't get you out fast enough if you even leave. Yeah.
Well, I'm very culturally ambiguous, so that helps me out a
Yep.
lot. I'm a native Spanish speaker, also is very helpful. But I think a lot of what I try to do is work with the communities that are there.
Sure.
So, there's a nonprofit in Thailand that I work with called Urban Light, and they work on human trafficking for boys.
Okay.
It was the first nonprofit to focus on human trafficking specifically for boys.
Okay.
And so Thailand has a really bad problem with the sex trade in young boys. And
I knew about the women, not about the boys.
Yeah. I mean, you see it in the street. So my friend, I went to Chiang Mai, and we were out, and she pointed it all out to me, like in broad daylight. I'd never seen it, and so there was a tourist.
Well, you're not looking for it either.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, there was a tourist like playing the game with this young little kid, and she's like, they're not playing games. Like, he's trying to court him, and she jumped out of her chair and intercepted the communication, got the individual away, got the young boy to come with her. But it's real. It's real things that are happening all over the world to a lot of young kids, and it's as a father, but I guess as a human, like, you see all these atrocities, and you try to work with the government, you try to work with the local community, and try to help shift that change.
Now, the world is a very ugly place with very ugly people.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
But there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of hope of people like my friend Alice, who does the nonprofit in Thailand, like my friend Bobby, who does it in Honduras, my friend Kenneth, who does the nonprofit in the Bronx that I was mentioning, do the computer training for. These are all individuals that are working in their own rights and together sometimes to make change. And
so
really
what's
important.
the biggest thing that could help to influence a change with this? Is this something that needs to get more funding? Is it something that needs more awareness? Is it a combination? Is it what?
I think everybody just needs a cause.
Okay.
Everyone should look at their lives and figure out, is there something that I hold dear to my heart, and something that I want to leave behind? What is my legacy? If I look back in my life, and do I feel like I've contributed to society in very positive ways, and have I made an impact to help someone, right?
Right.
We're all here for a short amount of time.
Yep.
And we can be self-indulgent, or we can be communal. And I chose to be communal. I chose to look at these different organizations all across the world and figure out, well, what is my place in this, and how can I try to move a needle in different ways. And so I think interacting with these nonprofits, especially that are focused on youth, is something that I love to do. And sometimes I'm just working on their technology, sometimes I'm working on the ground, and sometimes I'm teaching kids how to code. But all these little things make an impact.
So, as diversified as you are, is there a greater need for this to take place in third world countries, and I'm including Peru in that, anything in Central and South America? Or is there more of a demand and necessity for it here in the U.S.?
It's everywhere.
Okay.
I mean, that's a lot of people need help. You know,
Right.
we're 7 billion people, and
Yeah.
there's a small percentage of us that are doing well in life and that can offer help. And so I always kind of encourage individuals to take that moment and reach out and try to look. You know, it could be something as simple as like you have an elderly neighbor that needs help and attention. You know, my mom every single day cooks a meal for her neighbor, and she's been doing that for years. You know, it's such a small gesture, but it goes a long way. And so I think that's where I get a lot of my like good deedness.
Okay.
And so the more
So truly homegrown. It's not because of the Jesuits, but I'm sure that was a part of it as well.
oh yeah, I mean they definitely influenced me, but yeah, definitely homegrown. A lot of how I give impact is because of my family. Every single one of my family members do look at, you know, how can we help? How can we help our fellow community to be better and improve?
This is a far more fascinating conversation I thought we were going to have. I thought it was going to go in a much different perspective towards some of the governmental type things. I suppose you could do that, but I think that this is much more interesting here in what you're doing on a one-to-one basis to impact and influence people. And the benefit of that, I think, has to be extraordinary with these young lives that you are impacting.
Yeah, no, it's special. There, I'll give you one story.
Please.
There's this. She's now a woman by the name of Sonia, and I met her at a nonprofit, and they had a DJ classes. I'm a DJ, as one of
Of course you
any
are.
other things that I do, and so I subbed in because the DJ instructor didn't show up, so I subbed in and taught the class. And at the end of the class, she came up to me and she's like, "I need to talk to you. I have a problem." And I was like, "Shit, she's gonna talk to me about boys. This feels really uncomfortable." And she said,
She was how old then?
she was 16.
16, okay.
And I was just like, and then I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna have this conversation with her, but she didn't even say that. She's like, "I'm undocumented and I wanna go to college and I don't think I'm going to." And we sat and talked for about 2 hours in the classroom. I was basically trying to encourage her, like, no, you should go to college.
Sure.
Like, this is important. That you have every potential and every right to do so. And I want to make it, like, we have to figure this out together, not just me, but like as a community.
Right.
And so she agreed to to apply. And a couple months go by, or a year goes by. So she's 17 now, and she's like, she calls me to go to the nonprofit, and she's like, "Oh, I got into college." It's like, awesome. Where are you going? "I'm going to Harvard." I bawled. I was crying. I was like, "You what? You're going where?" And now she's graduated. She's got to be what, 26 now? I'm old. And she graduated Harvard. She's created dozens of nonprofits. She's written for many magazines, and her thesis to get into college was me and this group of people pushing her to apply, and that's what got her in. And I mean, it's beautiful. It's beautiful to see.
That's a
that
great
potential
feel-good
of
story, for
someone.
God's sakes. Good for you.
Yeah, I mean, what did I do but just encourage? You know what I
Well,
mean?
that's simple
but
things.
That little moment, you know,
Yeah.
that attention. I could have just said, "Oh, I don't have time to talk. I got to go."
Sure.
But that moment was significant, you know, and who knows? She probably still would have done it, you know, had she had talked to somebody else in that group, because I know a bunch of people are doing that. But the fact that she decided to have that conversation with me was significant. And I don't know, I'm so proud. Like, I didn't go to college, you know. I didn't do a tenth of what she's done in her life, and she's so young, you know. So it's cool. It's cool to see. And there's so many people like that in my life that I've been inspired by, that
Sure.
changed.
Solid little thing here, brother. And I appreciate you taking the time to come in and chat with us. If you don't mind, I'd like to see in a few months the evolution of some of the things you're working on.
Yeah, yeah.
And particularly the nonprofits and things for the kids. I think, again, education is everything. And taking the opportunity to craft some young minds in a positive direction is everything.
Yeah, something we all should be doing, right?
Absolutely. Honor to have you. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
for those of you who tuned in, I really appreciate your taking the time to follow us along here on Shaking Your World, and we look forward to any comments and emails. By all means, please direct them in, and we'll get them answered as soon as possible. So here's to you. Cheers.
Salud.